ॐ अज्ञानतिमिरन्धस्य ज्ञानाञ्जनशलाकया चक्षुरुन्मिलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरुवे नमः। नमो ॐ विष्णुपदाय कृष्णपृष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्तिवेदान्तस्वामिन् इति नामिने। नमस्ते सरस्वतीदेवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेष शून्यवादी पाश्चात्य देशतारिणे। जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासदि गौरभक्तवृंद। हरे कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्णा हरे हरे, हरे राम 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 हरे हरे। So here we see further the prayers offered by the living entity in the womb of his mother, as it is described by Lord Kapila. So this is a very important conclusion which the living entity is reaching, that it is not possible to be released from this material entanglement unless one surrenders unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So here specifically we can see Jnanam yad etat adadhar katamaha sadevas. Katamaha means who other than the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Jnanam yad etat, this knowledge that we are entangled in this material world and we can be liberated only if we surrender unto Him. So this knowledge of entanglement of the living entity and his liberation from this material existence can be given only by the Supreme Personality of Godhead as Paramatma in the heart. त्रयीकालिकं स्थिरचरेषु अनुवर्तित अंशः. That Supreme Lord, who is the partial representation as Paramatma in the heart of the living entities, He knows the three phases of time, Trayikalikam, past, present, future, and Sthirachareshu anuvartita amshaha. He is situated in non-moving chara and achara and moving living entities in their heart. Tam jiva karma padvim anuvartamanas tapatrayo upashamanaya vayam bhajema. So the living entities are directed to do the different kinds of karma activities in this material world by the direction of the super soul who is situated in the heart. And it is by him only tapatrayo upashamanaya that the threefold miseries of the living entities can come to an end only by the mercy of the Supreme Lord, and therefore we have to surrender unto Him only. So very important points, realization of this living entities in these prayers. One is that it is the Supreme Lord who is situated in the heart of every living entity. He is the one under whose direction the living entity is engaged and becomes entangled in this material existence because of misuse of his freedom. So when the living entity has misused his freedom, the Supreme Lord accordingly gives him direction from the heart, and he becomes entangled in this material world. Similarly, when the living entity is anxious to get out of this material world, the Supreme Lord gives him direction how to be freed from this clutches of material existence. So, it is the Supreme Personality of Godhead who directs all living entities, chara or achara, in this material existence. And under his direction only, the living entities are working in this material existence. So, if one wants to get released, then one has to surrender unto him alone. Then only it is possible that the living entity can get released from the clutches of Maya. So Prabhupada in the purport explains these very important points. Prabhupada says that when the conditioned soul is very serious and he is very anxious to get out of the influence of material clutches, then the Supreme Lord, who is sitting inside as Paramatma in the heart of all living entities, he gives him this knowledge: surrender unto me. So, as we were seeing in the last prayer, in the last class, the Supreme Lord is very eager. He is more eager than the living entities to liberate us from this material existence. When we are eager to come out of this material existence, the Supreme Lord is more eager to liberate us from this material existence. But it is very important that until and unless we are serious, we are anxious, the Supreme Lord, even though he is very anxious to get us out, he does not go against our desires. And this is the actual meaning of the love the Supreme Lord has for the living entities. There is no question of love if there is no freedom. Love comes only when there is free will. So the Lord respects the free will of his parts and parcels. Out of our free will, we decide to give up our engagement to the Supreme Lord, our loving service to the Supreme Lord, even though it is our constitutional position. And the Supreme Lord very kindly arranges to fulfill those desires in this material world, seated inside the heart. Here Prabhupada is quoting from Bhagavad Gita to explain that point. Prabhupada is saying it is accepted that the source of knowledge is the Supreme Person. Mattaha smritir jnanam apohanam cha. So source of all knowledge is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. If to the one who wants to be materially satisfied, or if he wants to lord over material world, then the Lord gives him opportunity to forget his service, and then the living entity becomes engaged in material activities. That is called apohanam. So when we say that the Lord gives us forgetfulness, what does it mean? We have to understand. When the living entity wants to enjoy this material world, it is possible only if he forgets his original position. Otherwise, there is no possibility. Because in our original position, we are servitor and he is the Supreme Master. Whereas we desire to become the Lord, which is not our actual position, then the Supreme Lord has to make us forget our original position. So he gives forgetfulness to such living entities. And practically we can see that all those who are in the material world, even though they have a tendency, because of their nature of being dependent on the Supreme Lord, to pray to the Supreme Lord, but nevertheless we find practically most of the living entities in the material world are in forgetfulness of the Supreme Lord. We doubt whether there is anyone beyond this material existence, whether anything exists even after we leave this world, isn't it? So practically we can find that the living entities in this material world are in forgetfulness of the Supreme Lord. Whereas in the spiritual world, everyone is conscious of the Supreme Lord. In the material world, everyone is in forgetfulness of the Supreme Lord. So here, there is no doubt that it is a great challenge to always remember the Supreme Lord, because we are in the environment of forgetfulness. This material world is called Maya. That means that which does not exist. That is what we have taken up to. The different relationships do not exist in reality in the material world, but we think this is what we are. Our relationship with this body does not exist, but we are made to believe I am this material body. And the people connected to this material body, they are mine. So this is called forgetfulness. So apohanam, the forgetfulness, is also given by the Lord to facilitate the desires of living entity to enjoy this material world. Jnanam, that Prabhupada explains, when one is frustrated in this material world, in trying to lord it over, and he becomes very serious to get out of this material world, then the Lord from within gives him jnanam, knowledge. So these are very important functions of Paramatma seated in the heart. To those living entities who want to forget him, he gives him knowledge by which one will forget him more and more. And to one who is anxious to get out of this material existence, one who has become frustrated, trying to lord it over this material world, and he becomes serious to get out, to him the Lord gives knowledge how he can come out. So now Prabhupada is explaining in the purport how this happens. So Prabhupada explains, the Supreme Lord seated inside the heart, when he becomes serious to get out of this material existence, the Supreme Lord gives him direction to approach a bona fide spiritual master. And Prabhupada is quoting from the teachings of Lord Chaitanya to Rupa Goswami. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu taught Rupa Goswami continuously for 10 days in Prayag. So there the Lord explains to Rupa Goswami that there are millions and millions of living entities, and they are scattered all over the universe, going up and down, Brahmande Brahmite, sometimes to the higher planet, sometimes to the lower planet, sometimes to the lower species of life. And then most of them, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu explains, even in the human form of life, comes in the category of uncivilized. Most of the people comes under the category of being uncivilized. Those who follow the rules and regulations given in the scriptures, they come under the category of being civilized human being. So uncivilized are practically no better than animals. And among the civilized, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu further explains that maximum are those who follow karma kanda, trying to simply follow the rules and regulations given in the scriptures in order to enjoy the material world, but as per the direction given in the scriptures. So those who do not believe in God, they are completely uncivilized. But those who believe in the Supreme Lord, there also we find that maximum people are inclined, interested only in gratifying their senses through following the rules and regulation given in the scriptures. And very few out of them, when they become frustrated from trying to enjoy the fruits of their results in this material world, they may try to get out of this material existence. So they are called as Jnanis. So first of all, majority of the population are inclined to enjoy the senses, and very few of them follow the scriptures and enjoy their senses. Out of them, very few may become frustrated in trying to enjoy this material existence, and they want to be liberated from this cycle of this material world. There Chaitanya Mahaprabhu explains that Koti Jnani Madhye, among thousands and thousands of such Jnanis, the pure devotee of the Lord is very, very, very rare. So actually you can imagine what is the meaning of devotional service to the Supreme Lord. Why it is called as most confidential knowledge, even though it is available in the scriptures, specifically in Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam. But even though it is available, very few people have access to this. So that is why Chaitanya Mahaprabhu explains, Brahmande Brahmite Kono Bhagyavan Jeev. One who is very fortunate. Otherwise there are so many living entities roaming around, from one planet to another, from one universe to another. Guru Krishna Prasade Paye Bhakti Lata Bij. So when the Supreme Lord sees that this living entity is very serious now, anxious to get out of this material existence, first of all, the Paramatma in the heart guides him to a bona fide spiritual master. And when he approaches the bona fide spiritual master, surrenders unto him and takes his guidance, then by the mercy of spiritual master and Krishna, Bhakti Lata Bij is sown in the heart of that living entity. See? So, first is the desire of the living entity when he is frustrated and he becomes anxious, he becomes serious to get out of this material existence. Then the Supreme Personality of Godhead as Paramatma in the heart gives him guidance as Paramatma to approach a bona fide spiritual master. And then when he goes and surrenders unto the spiritual master and follows the direction of the spiritual master, he becomes initiated by a bona fide spiritual master. It is at that point that Bhakti Lata Bij is sown in the heart by the mercy of Guru and Krishna. And then this seed becomes sprouted further when one follows the direction of the spiritual master in performing the devotional service, beginning with Shravanam and Kirtanam. So, hearing from the spiritual master is very, very essential. See, this knowledge, Prabhupada is saying, what the Lord gives as Paramatma in the heart is just the beginning. That same Paramatma later on, Prabhupada says, the spiritual master is the external manifestation of the same Paramatma who guided him from within. Later he guides him from outside. So the spiritual master is the external manifestation of the Paramatma. So that is why the spiritual master is considered to be the mercy personified of the Supreme Lord. When we are saying, when here the living entity is praying, I want to get the mercy of the Supreme Lord, and through His mercy only it is possible that I can go out of this material existence. So Prabhupada is explaining how this mercy is received by the living entity. First mercy is received by the living entity when he becomes serious through Paramatma in the heart, guidance from the Paramatma in the heart. Later, that mercy of the Supreme Lord becomes available to the living entity when he surrenders to bona fide spiritual master, who is nothing but the manifestation of Paramatma in the heart externally. That is why every day in the morning we sing that Samsara Dava Nalalidha Loka Tranaya Karunya Ghana Ghana Tvam. So this is very essential, that even though the Supreme Lord, He is the ocean of mercy, there is no doubt about it. But that ocean of mercy, we cannot receive it directly. It is a spiritual master who takes that mercy from that ocean of mercy, and he is the one who distributes this ocean of mercy to all the living entities. You see? And that is why it is said that Sakshat Haritvena Samasta Shastre. The bona fide spiritual master is to be worshipped on the same level as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And Krishna says that Acharyam Mam Vijaniya. Acharya should be considered to be as good as myself. So this should not be misunderstood that Acharya is Krishna himself. Kintu Prabhurya Priya Eva Tasya. Why he has to be worshipped on the level of the Supreme Lord? Because he is very confidential, dear servant. Priya Eva Tasya. Because of that understanding, that Yasya Prasadat Bhagavat Prasada. If we want to receive the mercy of the Supreme Lord, then it is possible only through the mercy of the spiritual master. And if the spiritual master is dissatisfied, then one should understand that actually one cannot get the mercy of the Supreme Lord. So, this knowledge which the living entity is saying is received from the Supreme Lord. Prabhupada is elaborating how it is received from the Supreme Lord. It is received through the bona fide spiritual master. So this is very important. So that is what Prabhupada is saying. It is to be accepted that the source of knowledge is the Supreme Person. This is confirmed in Bhagavad Gita. Mattaha smritir jnanam apohanam cha. So then Prabhupada is explaining that, and further he says, when one is frustrated in lording it over the material nature and is very serious about getting out of the material entanglement, the Lord from within gives him knowledge that he has to surrender unto Him. Then there is liberation. This knowledge cannot be imparted by anyone other than the Supreme Lord or his representative. So then Prabhupada is quoting from Chaitanya Charitamrita. When one is very anxious to get free from the material entanglement, he gets enlightenment through a spiritual master and Krishna. This means Krishna as the super soul is seated within the heart of the living entity. And when living entity is serious, the Lord directs him to take shelter of his representative bona fide spiritual master. Directed from within and guided externally by the spiritual master, one attains the path of Krishna consciousness, which is the way out of material clutches. So actually, for all of us, the only work we need to do is to simply follow the directions given by Srila Prabhupada. So if we simply follow the direction given by the bona fide spiritual master, then actually we are following what the Supreme Lord says. After the departure, physical departure of the spiritual master, Prabhupada says that the spiritual master has to be served specifically by Vani Seva. When the spiritual master is physically present, the disciple should serve him through his Vapu as well as Vani. That means his physical self as well as the orders, the words of the spiritual master. And when the spiritual master physically departs, Prabhupada says spiritual master is not the body. Spiritual master is the principle. It is the principle. So the spiritual master is still present. The principle of spiritual master is still present through the words of the spiritual master. And Prabhupada even says that one who is following the words of the spiritual master will always feel the presence of the spiritual master. Prabhupada says that physically I met my spiritual master hardly very few times. There were many others who were practically years together associated with Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur. Srila Prabhupada met his spiritual master only very few times. But the difference was that Srila Prabhupada was always associating with his spiritual master through the orders, through the words of his spiritual master. So actually that is considered to be the most important way of associating. Rather, Prabhupada says one should not try to so much associate physically with the spiritual master, because familiarity breeds contempt. Familiarity breeds contempt. So one has to be very careful that until and unless he has become very advanced, he should not too much physically try to associate with the spiritual master. Similarly, it is said for the pujaris, for the devotees who are in the deity services, they should not become too familiar with the deities. And it is very important, therefore, that one should keep on hearing more and more and more about the Supreme Personality of Godhead, so that even though he has got an opportunity actually to serve the deities, the Lord in the form of the deities, he should not become too familiar and start different kinds of offenses. Prabhupada explains that in chanting the holy name, there are only 10 offenses. But in serving the deities in the temple, there are 64 different kinds of rules and regulation one has to follow. So if you read Nectar of Devotion, We can get to know what are the different kinds of offenses, what are the different kinds of rules and regulation one has to follow. So all these directions, how one can become absorbed in his service to the Lord, how one can chant the holy name of the Lord, very, very mercifully they are all given by the spiritual master. We simply just have to follow the direction given, and then there is no doubt that actually one can come out of this material existence. That's why Prabhupada says, the secret to please the Supreme Personality of Godhead is to please the spiritual master. So, with one pointed attention, one should take the instructions of the spiritual master as his life and soul. It is said, when it is said that actually I was reading in that portion where when King Puranjan was born as a woman, and when she was married to a great devotee, so then when the devotee passed away, King Puranjan, in the form of the queen of that great devotee, wanted to also burn in the fire, as earlier it was in the Vedic practice that chaste woman does not like to leave after her husband has left this world. So there Prabhupada comments something very important. He says, similarly, the disciple should give up his life along with the spiritual master if he fails to carry out the order of the spiritual master. So even after the departure of the spiritual master, if we are living, then we should live only to carry out the orders of the spiritual master. Otherwise, Prabhupada says, one should better give up his life if he fails to carry out the orders of the spiritual master. That is the importance of understanding the principle of trying to satisfy the bona fide spiritual master. So if we can satisfy the spiritual master, then all the imports of the Vedic literature will become revealed in the heart of such a devotee. So this knowledge which the living entity is saying, that he is the supreme source of that knowledge, but how we receive that knowledge is very beautifully explained by Prabhupada in the purport, is through the agency of the spiritual master. So we'll stop with this. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Jagat Guru Srila Prabhupada ki